Lloyd Vance does a great job covering the NFL Network Contributor, also PFWA Writers Association. Could follow on Twitter at Lloyd Vance. Kind enough to join me on a Thursday on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Lloyd, good to touch base, pal. Listen, the NFL never sleeps, right? It never stops.
It never does, Q, and the weather may be bad out here, but the NFL always has something going on.
Yeah, it does. We'll get to the two moves in the NFC East yesterday. The big move, the Philadelphia Eagles basically fleecing Seattle for Michael Bennett. I'm telling you, if you're the Giants, if you're the Skins, and you're the Dallas Cowboys, and you're talking about their offensive lines, they got to be sweating a little bit more today, thinking about the depth that the Eagles now have, bringing a veteran guy, a guy that's got a ton of gas left in the tank. Say what you want about maybe his thoughts, his stances with some certain things, but he's a hell of a football player, and now you add him to that interior with those pass rushers, you give Jim Schwartz another toy to play with. It's just dangerous.
It is, and the world will just continue to stockpile talent. And, they're not going to have a lot of draft picks, which we'll probably get into a little later. But, Michael Bennett is a guy coming in, and basically he's going to replace Vinny Curry, a guy who was overpaid, really didn't produce, only had 3 sacks last year. And Bennett's going to come in there, bring that veteran presence, a guy, as you're saying, I still think he has a lot left. He was kind of being double-teamed a lot for Seattle Seahawks because Averill got hurt, and they weren't really concentrating on anybody else. So I think he comes here, he brings an attitude, and he also brings a wealth of experience to his team.
Yeah, and what's crazy is I know Atlanta, and I also heard the Patriots were interested, and the Eagles kind of sat on a little bit, and then they were able to get something done. And at the end of the day, you're basically giving up a seldom-used, if anything, wide receiver, another draft pick, but now you're adding another weapon to Fletcher Cox. So you got Bennett and Cox on the inside, you got Barnett and Graham on the outside, and oh, by the way, you can rotate in the Jernigans of the world and the Chris Long. So, I mean, does it, you hate to say rich gets richer, but do you think this is more of the Eagles now trying to become what the Patriots were to the AFC over the last 15, 20 years? You win that first Super Bowl, and then you just want to keep building upon that.
Yeah, now how things change. The Eagles kind of always seem to be a little lower in the pecking order in the NFL, but now they're at the top. And as you're saying, they're now the huge destination within the National Football League. A lot of guys are going to come there. They're going to want to try to win. I know the team has not been able to repeat since 04-05, the Patriots, but the Eagles are really trying to set themselves up in a good position to repeat and get back at least in the playoffs and be very competitive. So that defensive line, as you're saying, is going to have a lot of grit, a lot of depth, and it's going to be interesting to see if this Eagles team does not get complacent and they still stay hungry, even though they're now the champion.
Yeah, and they'll have a couple decisions to make with some of their players, some of their veterans with those contracts. How about the move that the Giants made yesterday with Alec Ogletree? I mean, that's a great trade. I mean, it's costly maybe in the long run, but what that trade does right away, it just really makes their linebacking, that position, the linebacking corps, that much more better. I mean, he's a flat-out player in coverage and against the run.
Yeah, Alec Ogletree, a guy who kind of underrated around the National Football League, but most of us guys that are in the know really watched him and loved his tape. A guy, as you're saying, can do a multiple variety of things. He can drop back in coverage, he can rush the passer. But I think this was really in relation to trying to cover the Eagles, and particularly Zach Ertz and the backs coming out of the backfield. So I think he'll do a good job there, and I'm really looking forward to this NFC East battle next season.
You look at some players that got hit with the tag. Jarvis Landry signs his franchise tender, and then we saw what happened with Le'Veon Bell in Pittsburgh. And I said this the other day, and I'm curious if you agree or not. First of all, if I'm a player, no way do I want to be tagged. I just don't. And conversely, if I'm a GM and I'm going to throw a ton of money at a player over a long-term contract, there's absolutely no way I want that player to come back at me and say, I'm going to sign here, but I also want a no-trade clause. So what are your thoughts on the tag itself and those two players that I mentioned, Landry and Bell?
Sure. The tag is to the NFL team's advantage. We know first-round draft picks, they can pick up their fifth-year option, so they have them for the first 5 years, and then they can use this tag to kind of control them for another 2 years plus. And what I'm thinking with the Pittsburgh Steelers are looking to do, I think they're just trying to use Le'Veon Bell for another 1 year rental. We know the running back position guys get beat up. He catches the football more than probably a lot of receivers out there, so he has a lot of touches, over 400 in a season. And I think they're just kind of going to use him, and they look forward to somebody maybe in the future, whether it's James Conner or somebody else. So the tag is very positive thing for teams, but as we know, there's a lot of animosity behind that. Players don't like playing behind it. Yes, they'll have that 1-year guaranteed signing contract, but they won't have that signing bonus and guaranteed money out there.
Let me get back real quick on the Bennett move by Seattle, and it's certainly spelling the end of that. I don't even want to call them a short-lived dynasty, because they really, if they won back-to-back, or if they won two, I should say, maybe the discussion's a little different. They lose the second time around to the Patriots. But how about Richard Sherman? It just does seem if they release him, then you're really starting to see the change in the guard there in Seattle with the Legion of Boom and all those outspoken players.
Yeah, and we saw that at the end of the season, Q, and we thought some changes were going to be coming with this team. They finished 9-7, kind of limp home, and they just got too old and beat up on defense. And now Paul Allen, their owner, as well as John Snyder, the general manager, are really looking hard at this roster. It's not 3-4 years ago when they were still ascending. How that interception by Butler at the goal line changed everything for this organization. Now they're looking to move a lot of these guys out there making too much money. Richard Sherman in particular, he's going to be 30 this year, and he was slated to make $11 million. So I'm talking to a couple guys out there. He is going to be released the next couple of days. And you're right, there's changing of guard there, but Pete Carroll, a coach in the know, really knows the college ranks. I think he'll replenish that team real quick.
Kirk Cousins, you look at the situation in Minnesota with 3 free agent quarterbacks in Case Keenum, Teddy Bridgewater, and Sam Bradford. The Jets are certainly in play for Cousins. You got the Vikings, the connections there, maybe Buffalo, Arizona. When it's all said and done, where do you think Kirk Cousins lands? Who does he sign with?
Yeah, I still think the Denver Broncos are really looking hard at Kirk Cousins. They have an ideal situation there with that defense, and then they could use that number 5 pick in the first round to take somebody like a Quentin Nelson, a guard, to rebuild that offensive line, because that was one of their bigger problems. And then they need to find a running game, obviously. But I think that Denver is the key player there. As you were saying, Minnesota still could be in the mix as well. But I think in the end they're going to keep their current quarterback, Case Keenum, there. And then the Jets, who knows what's going on there? Kind of a wild card, but I think in the Jets, in the end, will probably get one of these college quarterbacks.
Okay, so let's stick with that for a moment. With Cleveland at number 1 and number 4, do you foresee a situation where they take Barkley, Cleveland at number 1, and try to draft a quarterback at number 4? Or do you think they draft a quarterback at number 1 and risk leaving Barkley out there, and maybe the Giants snatching him up in number 2?
Yeah, everybody I'm talking to says the Browns are not as enamored with these quarterbacks. I think they will get one of the quarterbacks at 4 that kind of falls in their lap, whether it's Josh Allen or Rosen or Darnold, which other guy kind of falls in their direction. But Saquon Barkley had such a tremendous combine, and he was just the buzz of the entire event, that they think they could build their offense around him. And let's not forget, running back can have an immediate effect on a team. Look at what Kareem Hunt did with the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think he may be the guy that's going number 1.
So if the Giants aren't enamored with any quarterbacks and Barkley goes number 1 and they have the pick in number 2, call me crazy, is it possible that Gettleman gets so enamored with Quentin Nelson, the guard out of Notre Dame, that they either draft him at 2 or try to trade down to get him plus picks in return? I mean, can you envision that type of scenario?
It could, and Gettleman seems to be very entrenched with keeping Eli Manning the next 2 or 3 years. With these quarterbacks out there, do they take a guy and then he's going to sit on the bench and let's face it, if the guy's not playing, and then everybody's going to start pointing the finger at the general manager. They could also go with Fitzpatrick, the great defensive back from Alabama, as well. So they have a couple of needs. Their offensive line, their defense needs some more shoring up. So they have a variety of ways that they can go. But these quarterbacks right now, none of them is standing out as the definitive John Elway number 1 quarterback that everybody has to have right now.
Yeah, and I'm not high on any of these guys, and I don't think it's a question of – I mean, I watched them play. I mean, I don't sit there and watch 50 hours of film on these guys, not like some of the mock guys do, but none of them really stand out. And from everyone I talk to, people talk about Rosen, they talk about Allen's arm, they talk about Darnold, who maybe pro-ready, would fit in a big market. you got other teams too out there. Don't discount the Ravens taking a quarterback, Arizona looking at a quarterback. So I guess my point is, if you take a shot here with any of these quarterbacks and you miss top 10, you're setting your franchise back for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years.
You could, and we look at the top of the draft a couple of years ago. Right now, there's questions on Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota. Are they really the guy? And these teams are invested in them, and they built their franchise around them. So if these teams at the top, whether it's Cleveland or the Giants or whoever, if they're not enamored by these quarterbacks, they can help themselves in other areas. And we've seen it this year with the Eagles. You don't have to have that frontline guy if you have all the pieces around them. You can still win in the playoffs.
Let me leave you out on this. What do you make of some of these questions that are asked to these prospects during Combine? I mean, after a while, I mean, it's just, what is it necessary, or is there a real legit reasoning behind it?
No, it's not necessary. And a lot of these guys are very old school football types, and they're not as PC. I'll put it that way. They may need to take a course on what they need to ask in the new world of social media and the world we're living in sports today. So then these young guys are going to let it slip what these questions were back in the day. It was kind of a closed circle. And the NFL probably needs to get a handle on this, because when you're asking somebody about their preferences and things of that sort, that you just can't do that in today's world.
No, you can't, and we've seen what's transpired over the last several years in the NFL, and again, it's just, but this is nothing new, right? It's just the ones that come out that we talk about, because I'm sure hundreds of prospects have been asked some of these ridiculous questions, and I don't know if there's any rhyme or reason. I think it's unnecessary, but anyway, all right, we're starting to heat up here in the off season, and we got the draft right around the corner. I'm sure we're going to have a bunch of other news and stories to break down next week. Always appreciate you jumping on board for some good dialogue, pal.
All right, thanks for having me on.
All right, you got to have a good week. Lloyd Vance joining us, contributing editor and writer for NFL Network. Good follow on Twitter at Lloyd Vance, appearing on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.